Hi everyone, Singularity Polaro here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Jon Hopkins album, Singularity. This is the fifth solo album from electronic music producer based in the UK, Mr. Jon Hopkins.
Okay, what are you, some kind of dork? Some kind of geek?
What?
Some kind of smart glasses guy?
Okay, alright.
Okay there, Professor Smarty Pants. You're a nerd, you're a geek, you're a nerd.
I last talked about Jon Hopkins' music, I think 5 years or so ago with his album Immunity, when his futuristic tech house fusions were kind of colliding with his classical music leanings. A super solid electronic music record, which most fans would probably categorize as one of the best of the decade. And even though I'm not as head over heels about this record as many people are, I will not deny the hype around this album. There are a lot of fantastic tracks on it. But ultimately, I just failed to see how this album was greater than the sum of its separate, linear, IDM mini-suites, but I think that's exactly the issue Jon tries to smooth over on Singularity. If you will allow me to go full tiny mixtapes here and throw a definition or a quotation into the review, in the mathematical or physics sense, singularity means a point at which a function takes an infinite value, especially in space-time when matter is infinitely dense, as at the center of a black hole. And I cite that definition because that is the vibe, that is the feeling that it feels like Jon Hopkins is certainly trying to achieve with this music, at least in a musical or a conceptual sense, in just how holistic of an experience this album is, and just how infinite and linear a lot of these compositions feel. Now, Singularity might carry a lot of the same musical aspects that Jon's last album, Immunity, did. However, I would say in comparison, it's a tad more progressive and cohesive. Clearly, he tried to make this album a more seamless and cinematic experience. But while this album is deeper than your average Electric Daisy Carnival DJ set, don't make a mistake in assuming that Jon isn't working with a clear formula on this album. He most certainly is. I mean, how many moments on this album are dependent entirely on these warped synth leads skipping into infinity across an astral pond of propulsive techno rhythms with a heavy house bounce? I mean, a great deal, a great deal of moments. Neon pattern drum, the title track, Emerald Rush, everything connected, really the whole first leg of the album. And after this handful of tracks, Jon suddenly transitions us into like this ambient triptych, where all of a sudden his production and his musical pieces get so much softer and more formless. The song COSM certainly calls back to the glimmering, ornate, very serene IDM that he was dropping on his 2009 album Insides. We also get some drony and ethereal tones on the track Feel First Life. A song that also features like these really ghostly, beautiful, angelic chorus vocals calling out. Another beautifully cinematic moment on the album. It sort of sounds like new age music I can get down with, and given the title, I mean, I really do kind of get the sense that he's trying to make this piece be about the birth of something. And it's a moment on the album that certainly feels great. It's a good cool down after the incredibly intense Everything Connected. The song Echo Dissolve is a really lonely and still piano piece. It's a sweet, simplistic moment on the record, one of the few tracks that truly feels like an interlude, a transitional moment. But the piano is not entirely alone. Toward the back end of the track, there are some very dark, subterranean, bassy rumbles that kind of remind you of just how gargantuan the sound and the frequency scope of this record is. Even in its subtlest moments, Jon tries to hit you with like, you know, some kind of interesting sound play, which if there's one thing that Jon really kind of leans on as far as creating the magic on this album, it's really that, the sound play, the sound design. The song Luminous Beings is the most gargantuan song on the entire record, standing at 11 minutes, which eventually coasts into another minimalist piano piece, Recovery, that finishes the entire album out. A track that I don't mind, but still kind of feels a little redundant at this point, for a few different reasons. I mean, compositionally, it's not really that stunning. I feel like it doesn't really bring anything to the table that previous piano-centric parts brought, and considering we just went through these several ambient pieces just before we hit Luminous Beings, it feels almost like we've kind of boomeranged back into that spot rather than kind of finishing the album off at a high mark. It just kind of feels like an extension of the compositional fizzle that kind of ends Luminous Beings off. Which overall in the track listing, while it's not one of my favorites, it's still kind of one of the more standout tracks. It has some very good pacing. I do like the way that Jon melds some of the more synthetic and organic sounds in the mix on this track. The fractured piano arpeggios and the hypnotic beats, the drony distant synthesizers, and after the halfway mark, there's even kind of like a post-rock-ish string breakdown. I do wish it was a slightly bigger finale for the record though, as after this string break, the song kind of coasts out into this more serene set of beats and synths that are just kind of mild by comparison with the first leg of the track. It does feel overall kind of like Jon front-loaded this record with his most gratifying, hard-hitting, and fireworks-like tracks, and then at the halfway point, while I don't mind going in a more mellow direction, the more easygoing side of this album fails to conjure any moments that are as powerful as the first several tracks. Still though, I do mostly want to compliment the flow of this album overall. While it may seem like what Jon is doing on these songs, even on the first leg, is super simple on like a micro level, with the subtle progressions and the rhythmic repetitions, the epic layering of instrumentation, the blatant use of reverb and various effects, on a macro level and how all of these songs work together and kind of build off of one another in one large overarching musical experience, I think that's really where this album sees success. I mean, quite a few songs on here on their own sound larger than life, but hearing them add up together in this track list makes the statement seem even grander. I love the slow, epic build on the title track that kicks the album off incredibly well, the fuzzed, manipulated, and constantly evolving synth lead that takes over the majority of Emerald Rush, and the droning, orgasmic rush of Everything Connected. My issue, though, is that this flow, I think, kind of breaks up a little bit during this ambient trio of tracks, where the momentum built by the previous cuts gets obliterated, especially on the song COSM. I mean, after this spot on the album, the record is still a decent listen, but it's no longer the continuously exciting ascension that it was up until this point. All that being said though, I still think Singularity was a very good listen. An album that reaches for the stars for a good part of its track listing, but then maybe ultimately realizes it's stranded here on Earth. I'm feeling a decent 2 strong 7 on this one. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Just leave a comment in the comments if you're feeling full of thoughts. Over here next to my head is a video you can check out, either that or the link to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell as well, and I will see you guys in the next one. Anthony Fantano, Jon Hopkins, forever